First of all, my dear brothers, there is a very important point that I discussed in Guadalajara and also in Durango. I am talking about the concept that exists about matter. Obviously, I was saying in all of those lectures that matter is something that the materialists do not know. It is obvious that it is absolutely empirical to call everything matter. I could affirm emphatically that a piece of iron can be called matter, but what would we say then about copper, silver, gold, platinum, a piece of cotton, or a piece of ice? Would they also be matter? If a chemist in a laboratory were to call all the existing chemical elements in it phosphorus, would not that affirmation be absurd? No less absurd is to call every element, every substance, matter, per se, that is to say, just because one wants to do so. Those that do that are empirical, but not scientific in the transcendental sense of the word. Undoubtedly, the so-called matter that has generated so much passion in many individuals negatively polarized is terra incognita, unknown territory, to official science. But they have their pontiffs, their unbreakable dogmas, and their Bibles. For example, the dialectic of Karl Marx, I am talking emphatically about the materialist dialectic, would be the book Bible of the followers of the God matter. That is indubitable. With all of this and what we are affirming in emphatic form, I say that which is called matter, or what they call matter as a substance per se means by itself in Latin, is something unknowable. It is clear that the fanatics of the materialist dialectic would try to refute what we are saying with anger, based on the unbreakable dogma of Marxism that rejects the categorical affirmation of Immanuel Kant of the substance itself, etc. Marx wants to enclose the mind within the unbreakable dogma and to close the door to the dialectic. We undoubtedly are dialectics, and for this reason we do not admit dogmas, no matter if they are of materialist or spiritual type. We are not against the dialectic because we are dialectics. We use the dialectic in the analysis and in the doctrinal exposition. If we say that Immanuel Kant had the bad habit of speaking about the things themselves, we would be acting dogmatically. Take into account that the thing itself is something that the pontiffs of the materialist dialectic do not know. Walking through the way of philosophical disquisitions, we enter into really amazing fields. The so-called materialist dialectics certainly have just one key to interpret nature. The Gnostics are different. We have 7 keys, and for this reason, in the intuitive and deductive field of investigation, we have a surprising advantage. Even now, there still are reactionaries that think that beyond the speed of light, the existence of any atom is not possible. This smells of clericalism of a materialist type, because we have amazing speeds, such as the force of gravity. We well know that the gravitational waves are much faster than the waves of light. So those that establish a dogmatic chair about the substance itself, or the so-called matter, close the door to the dialectic, and we are dialectic revolutionaries. We cannot establish dogmas. The substance itself, obviously, has to be processed in a multidimensional form. To reject the multidimensionality is to reject the theory of relativity. And the theory of relativity of Einstein is demonstrated mathematically. We do not have to think just in an external space or in the superior space. It is convenient to think in the inner space, or better to say, in the different inner spaces. A dogmatic chair is always being established saying that nature tends to become exhausted. Apparently, this could be axiomatic when we observe the involutive processes of it. But let us take into account that evolution and involution are the mechanical axis of the universal existence. What really happens is that besides evolution and involution, there exists another completely different law. I am talking about the law of the inner space, the one that escapes from evolution and involution, the one that passes to a radical revolutionary transformation, the one that we would say enters in the superior dimensions by revolution. Well, observing the things from this point of view, one day nature will become exhausted. Well, apparently exhausted. That is unquestionable. What will happen is that the involutive and evolutive processes will not continue, and the entire nature will pass to another dimension, to a superior one. The physical matter can be disintegrated, but as substance itself, or by itself, in light of the postulates of Immanuel Kant and his critique of pure reason, it obviously will have to pass from dimension to dimension, in a multidimensional scale, to finally reach the state that we could call homogeneous, divine, much beyond the simple chaotic conceptions of any genesis. Let us think of a tree. It dies. After having borne its fruits, it becomes a heap of logs, but it leaves its germs, and in the germ continues the possibility for that tree, the possibility of repeating its existence. The same happens with the earth, or with any world in space, or sun in the infinite. One day it will die, but it will continue as a simple germ, in the profound space, in the universal spirit of life, in the great alaya of the universe. Then, in that region, it will wait for the moment of a new manifestation. Obviously, when that instant comes, the electric force, the electric hurricane will polarize that substance, and a new chaos will be born. And it is the fire, or logos, who will fecundate that chaos. We can call that chaos the limbus, or the mysterium magnus. That chaos by itself belongs to that matter, the one that I was talking about, called Ilyaster. The Orientals call it Sabat. Undoubtedly, that germ, after being differentiated by the electric impulse, or polarized, or bipolarized, will be fecundated by the fire. And from that chaos will be born a new life. The anima mundi will come forth in a new form. It will descend from dimension to dimension through successive crystallization until it appears as a new world. When this happens, our actual Earth will be just a geological crust, a cadaver, a new moon that will gravitate around that new world of the future. Well, I do this exposition to tell you this. There is no doubt that that substantial, homogeneous, pure world polarizes itself according as it crystallizes and finally appears physically already polarized. As a positive part, we will call it spirit. As a negative part, we could call it matter, even if the people do not know what that is. Those that identify themselves with the positive pole of that homogeneous substance, already polarized, are called spiritualists. They create religious organizations, schools, mystic sects. And those that identify themselves with the negative pole are called materialists. The first ones adore the God spirit of anthropomorphic form. The second ones adore their beloved God matter. The first ones are religious as the second ones. They are two opposite flows that destroy one another. We need to attain the third force. The positive is useful. It fulfills its duty. The negative is useful, but we need a third force, the neutralizing force. This one resolves the fight of the opposites, jumping into the synthesis. The third force is neutralizing. The third force is interior, profound. It leads us to the being. We need to self-explore ourselves in order to self-know and to discover in ourselves that something that is the truth. The spiritualists believe in an anthropomorphic God. The materialists believe in their beloved God matter. Both are believers, and neither one of the two knows the truth. The truth is only possible to be known through the third force that is within ourselves, here and now. I'm talking about the neutral force. This force will lead us through the inner psychological exploration to the living experience of that which is beyond the body, the effects and the mind of that which is the truth. Gnosis is a word that means knowledge, wisdom. It is the wisdom, the Sophia, what we need, and we will not find it outside of us, but within ourselves. We need to part ourselves from the flows of the extreme right and the extreme left, and to walk through the revolution of the center, profoundly inwards to experience the real. We need to self-know ourselves. Only in this form is it possible to attain the real experience of that which is much beyond time. So forgetting the fights and conflicts that exist between the extreme right and the extreme left, we self-explore ourselves in direct form to self-know and to discover through the real experience that the followers of the different schools of right and left do not know the truth. The great Kabir Jeshua ben Pandira said, "Conoced la verdad, y ella os hará libres," or "Et conoscetis veritatem, et veritas liberabit vos." Know the truth, and it shall make you free. John 8:32. Only the mystic experience of the truth can give us the true freedom. For this reason, it is urgent to self-explore ourselves. First of all, how could it be possible to attain the experience of the real if we have not known ourselves? It is written, "Nose te ipsum," know thyself. Thales de Miletus wrote that phrase on the frontispiece of the temple. We need to know ourselves profoundly in all the levels of the mind. In a certain occasion, I was speaking with a certain person of twisted mustaches. He was saying to me that he knew himself. I said, "Sir, if you know yourself, tell me how many atoms has a hair of your mustache?" The man sweated cold. "I do not know." I said, "But if you do not know a simple hair of your mustache, how come that you will know yourself completely?" In reality, he could not reject what I had said. He would want to refute me before the solemn verdict of the public consciousness, but certainly the argument was convincing, and in no way he could reject it. Thales de Miletus was a great initiate of ancient Greece, was somebody that stood out for his wisdom. He is called the philosopher of the fire because he went really deep into the wisdom of the fire. He could go where many have not. The fire is something that even today is unknown to humanity. They utilize it as they use electricity, but no one can say what thing the fire is. It remains always ignored. Well, continuing with this lecture, with this disquisition, I will say this. First of all, it is urgent, undelayable, as I had said in the other meeting, to change our way of thinking, to learn to think in a new way, in a different form. Because the gnosis is a wisdom that, even though is so ancient, is new. It is written in the Christic gospel, "No one puts new wine into old wineskins," because it has also been said in the Christic gospel, "No one would cut a piece from a new garment to mend." It would be absurd in every sense to do something like that. Think of what it would be like to cut a piece from a new cloth in order to fix an old one. That is absurd in 100%. So, my dear brothers, we need to learn to think in a completely new form. A mental transformation is necessary. But let us go deeper on it. There exist 4 types of consciousness, or 4 states of consciousness, that it is convenient that you understand profoundly. The first is the one of the person who is profoundly asleep in his bed. In this circumstance, the ego walks, is out of the physical body, but absolutely unconscious, in a comatic state. It is good to understand that deceased people, after they leave their physical body, live in the inner worlds with the consciousness completely asleep. Normally, they walk dreaming, completely, integrally, totally unconscious. The same happens in that small death that is the ordinary sleep. When the physical body sleeps, the ego walks unconscious, asleep. The second state is called waking state. It happens that when a person returns to the waking state, he continues dreaming, as asleep as he was, with the difference that now his body is active to the dreams, and for this reason more dangerous. One thing is when the body is passive to the dreams, then there is no danger. And another thing is when the body is active to the dreams, then the danger is bigger. In the called waking state, the body is active to the dreams, and it is the moment when mistakes of any kind are made. The entire humanity lives in those two states of consciousness. It is necessary to pass to the third state of consciousness, that is to say, to the self-remembering of oneself by changing the way of thinking. Because if we come to this Lumisol to receive the teachings and later in the street we are once again as we were before, what has been the change that we have attained in the way of thinking? How worthwhile could it be to receive the teachings here in this lecture if in the street, at the job, we continue with our negative emotions, with our reactions before the impacts of the external world, with the same jealousy of every day, with those same hatreds, etc.? It is clear that it is necessary to change the way of thinking, to learn to think in virtue of the teachings that are received here. Because if the teachings are received and the mechanical way of thinking continues as always, then what? What would be the change? It would not be possible to pass to a third state of consciousness, to the state of self-remembering, if we previously do not change the way of thinking. Undoubtedly, if we desire a change, we will have to begin by changing the intellectual and emotional aspects. This means to eliminate from ourselves all of that unconscious intellectual automatization, all of those processes of the reasoning mind, all of those jealousies, all of that anger, all of that hatred. It is urgent that there be a radical change in the intellect if we want to pass to a superior level of being. That is to say, if we want to pass to the third state of consciousness, to the self-remembering of oneself. Because if one identifies with an insulter, it means that one continues as before. If we were beaten, we beat, etc. Obviously, he has not changed his way of thinking. If a man is jealous, is spying his wife after having been receiving the teachings, it means that he has not changed. He just carries the gnosis in his memory as an ornament, like when he dresses a new suit, but in the way of thinking he remains being the same. When one is full of lust, it means that one has not changed, that is the same. How could one pass to the third state of consciousness? And why is one lustful? Because one carries psychic aggregates of lust. The one that is identified with some scene of lust obviously forgives himself, and in that moment is lustful. He gives the chance to the eyes of lust to do what they want. Someone that forgives himself in front of a cup of wine and ends up drunk. Someone that forgives himself before a person of the opposite sex and ends up fornicating, and somebody that forgets himself in front of the insulter and ends up insulting also, in truth is not prepared yet to pass to the third state of consciousness. That is the state of self-remembering. So he has passed or has not. In this cannot exist vagueness of any kind. Well, brothers, let us continue with these disquisitions. It is necessary to work the intellectual center and also the emotional one. There is no doubt that the negative emotions turn us into liars. The negative emotions turn us violent. The negative emotions make us to forget ourselves. A jealous person taken by the negative emotion of jealousy becomes violent. He can kill another and as a consequence go to jail. He can mistreat his wife, perhaps unjustly, etc. So the negative emotions can turn one into a slanderer, a false, violent, perverse person. But in truth, it is very hard to control the negative emotions. In one moment we are tranquil, and it can happen that at the next we will not be. Let us suppose that we are here in holy peace, listening to this lecture, and suddenly somebody brings a news. He says that a relative or a brother has been beaten by somebody, or that was shot. Of course, if we do not have control of ourselves, we get out totally uncontrolled. We leave immediately the Lumisol, protesting internally. We see somebody in the street, we explain rapidly what happened, and it can happen that once being in the place where it was said the tragedy happened, nothing has happened, it was a false alarm. Then what? 1. We left the lecture. 2. We calumniated somebody. 3. We adopted violent attitudes, and what was worst, we strengthened the eyes that we have in the negative part of the emotional center, instead of disintegrating them. Observe how much damage can produce the negative emotions. For one negative emotion, we can become murderers. Because of one negative emotion, we can become perverse. Because of one negative emotion, we can calumniate the fellow man. Because of one negative emotion, we can say false judgments on our best friend, etc. However, we have the strong tendency to let ourselves be taken away by the negative emotions. We have to learn to be austere, serene, moderate. So introduce the gnosis in our way of thinking to change, and to introduce it in the emotional center takes some work. But if we think in the centers of the organic machine, for example, the intellectual center that has something of the emotional center and something of the motor center, how could we attain the total control of the inferior emotional center? If we say, I will have willpower, I will not be taken away by the violent negative emotions at any time, it can happen that at the first situation we fail terribly. Then we need to introduce the gnosis here in the mind, to feel the superior emotion that gnosis produces, and with the bit of will that we have attained, together with the gnosis and the superior emotion, it will let us to control completely the inferior negative emotions. Anyway, it is necessary to control the inferior emotions with the superior emotions. Let us control the inferior emotions with the superior ones. Let us introduce the gnosis into the brain so our way of thinking can change, and we can live according to the principles and rules of the universal Gnosticism. Let us modify the process of thought, and there will be a kind of intellectual emotion in our head. That plus a bit of will let us to control the inferior emotions. Obviously, the total destruction of the inferior emotions comes with the annihilation of the undesirable psychic elements that are related with the inferior part of the emotional center. But meanwhile, those elements are destroyed, we have to control the inferior emotional center with the emotive part of the intellect, an intellect illuminated by the Gnostic mysticism. That is the obvious way to follow. Only through that way can really be processed the so necessary change. It is necessary to change little by little. This is possible if we introduce the Gnostic rules, the wisdom of the universal Gnosticism, in our thought, in our mind. But as I say, it is necessary to modify the mind completely. We need a new mind to think, because with the old mind, with that decrepit mind, with that injured mind, with that mind used to the normal way of life that we have, it would not be possible to provoke a change in ourselves. So the intellectual center and the emotional center have to be worked with the Gnostic rules, with the teaching that we have given, if in truth we want to change in ourselves. We need to think in a new form, to feel in a new form, to act in a new form. What do we want through all this? Obviously, we are in search of something that is extremely important. We are in search of the truth, to purify the cosmic consciousness that is in